The champagne flute trembled in my hand as I stared at my reflection in the bridal suite mirror. The ivory silk dress hugged my curves perfectly, its intricate beadwork catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows of the grand ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel. But it wasn't the dress that made my hands shake. It was the man waiting for me at the altar, and the woman who would be forced to watch from the front row. 2 months ago, I never could have imagined this moment. 2 months ago, I was the supportive younger sister, swallowing my pride while my older sister Brittany publicly humiliated me at her own engagement party. She had stood there in her designer gown, surrounded by Charleston's social elite, and made sure everyone knew exactly what she thought of my bargain bin dress from Nordstrom Rack. "Oh, honey," she had said with that patronizing smile I'd grown to hate, her voice carrying across the country club's terrace. "Did you shop in the clearance section again? You know Daddy would have given you money for something appropriate." The laughter that followed still echoed in my ears. 60 guests, including my parents, had watched as my cheeks burned with embarrassment. But what hurt most wasn't the public shaming. It was seeing him in the crowd, Michael Harrison, her fiancé, looking uncomfortable as she delivered her calculated blow. Now, as I adjusted my veil one final time, I couldn't help but smile. Michael wasn't her fiancé anymore. In 3 weeks, he had called off their engagement, and in 6 weeks, he had asked me to marry him instead. The speed of it all had shocked everyone, including myself. But sometimes life has a way of correcting its own mistakes. The knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. "Emma, it's time," my maid of honor whispered. I took a deep breath, thinking about how Brittany was probably sitting in that front row right now, forced to smile, while her ex-fiancé married her little sister. The same sister she had tried to diminish just 2 months before. As I walked down the aisle, my father's arm steady beside me, I could feel every eye in the room following my movement. The Gothic Revival architecture of St. Philip's Church provided the perfect backdrop, its soaring arches and stained glass windows casting colorful patterns across the polished marble floor. 200 guests had gathered for what Charleston society was already calling the wedding of the year, though for reasons none of them had anticipated. My eyes found Michael immediately. He stood at the altar in his charcoal gray tuxedo, his sandy brown hair perfectly styled, those green eyes that had captivated me since college, fixed on mine with an intensity that made my heart race. Behind him, his groomsmen shifted nervously, clearly aware of the tension that permeated the entire ceremony. But it was the front row that held my attention. There sat my parents, my mother dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, my father beaming with pride despite the circumstances. And beside them, Brittany. My older sister wore a deep navy dress that complemented her auburn hair, her posture rigid as she maintained a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She had aged 5 years in 2 months, the stress of the scandal evident in the fine lines around her mouth. The whispers had started the day after Michael called off their engagement. Charleston's high society thrived on gossip, and the sudden dissolution of what everyone considered a perfect match had provided months of speculation. When Michael and I announced our engagement just 4 weeks later, the whispers became a roar that neither family could ignore. "She stole him," I had heard someone say at the country club just last week. But they didn't understand the truth of what had happened between us. They couldn't see the months of long conversations, the growing connection that had developed while Brittany was too busy planning her social calendar to notice her fiancé's withdrawal. As I reached the altar, Michael took my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. The minister began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the sacred space. But I found myself thinking about the conversation that had changed everything. It was 3 days after Brittany's engagement party, and I had run into Michael at a coffee shop in downtown Charleston. "I owe you an apology," he had said, his voice heavy with regret. "What happened at the party, what she said to you, it wasn't right." We had talked for hours that day, and I saw a side of Michael I had never noticed before. Beneath the polished exterior was a man who valued kindness and authenticity, qualities that Brittany had never possessed. "Do you, Michael Harrison, take Emma Catherine Sinclair to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The minister's voice brought me back to the present moment, and I watched as Michael's face softened with genuine emotion. "I do," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the church. The certainty in his tone made my chest tighten with happiness. But I couldn't help noticing how Brittany's hands clenched in her lap. When it was my turn to speak the vows, I looked directly into Michael's eyes, blocking out everything else. "I do," I whispered, and the words felt like a promise I had been waiting my whole life to make. The minister pronounced us husband and wife, and when Michael kissed me, I heard the collective intake of breath from the congregation. This was really happening. The reception at the Ocean House was everything I had dreamed of. The historic mansion overlooking Charleston Harbor provided breathtaking views, and the September evening air carried the scent of magnolia and saltwater. White garden lights twinkled in the oak trees draped with Spanish moss, creating an atmosphere that was both elegant and romantic. I moved through the crowd of guests, accepting congratulations and trying to ignore the sideways glances and barely concealed whispers. Everyone wanted to know how I had managed to win Michael away from Brittany, but they were asking the wrong question. It wasn't about winning. It was about finally being seen for who I truly was. "You look radiant, sweetheart," my mother said, pulling me aside during the cocktail hour. "I know this situation has been difficult for everyone, but seeing you this happy, I think you made the right choice." Her words meant more to me than she could know. For years, I had lived in Brittany's shadow, always the quieter, more serious sister who preferred books to parties. The dinner reception began with Michael's best man giving a toast that carefully avoided mentioning how the groom had met the bride. Instead, he focused on our college friendship and the way we had reconnected recently. It was diplomatic, but everyone in the room knew the real story. When it came time for the father-daughter dance, my dad held me close as we swayed to "The Way You Look Tonight." "Your mother and I are proud of you, Emma," he whispered. "You've always known your own mind, even when others tried to tell you what to think." I knew he was referring to all the years I had endured Brittany's criticism and subtle cruelty. But it was during the bouquet toss that the evening's tension finally reached its breaking point. Brittany had excused herself earlier, claiming a headache, but I spotted her, standing in the shadows near the terrace doors, watching as I gathered the single women behind me. Her face was a mask of controlled fury, and I realized that seeing me in the spotlight, her spotlight, was more than she could bear. The bouquet sailed through the air in a perfect arc, and by some twist of fate, it landed directly in the hands of my cousin Jessica, who squealed with delight. The crowd cheered and applauded, but from the corner of my eye, I saw Brittany's face crumple. She turned and disappeared through the terrace doors, and something in my chest tightened with an emotion I couldn't quite name. Michael appeared at my side, his hand finding the small of my back. "Everything okay?" he asked, following my gaze toward the empty doorway where Brittany had vanished. "I should go check on her," I said, surprising myself with the words. Despite everything that had happened between us, she was still my sister. Michael nodded understandingly and kissed my temple. "I'll keep our guests entertained," he promised. I found Brittany sitting on the stone steps leading down to the garden. Her navy dress spread around her like a pool of midnight. The September evening had grown cool, and she was shivering slightly in the ocean breeze. She looked up when she heard my footsteps, her makeup smudged from tears she had tried to hide. "Come to gloat?" she asked, her voice hoarse. I sat down beside her, careful not to wrinkle my wedding dress. "No," I said simply. "I came to check on my sister." For a moment, we sat in silence, listening to the distant sound of laughter and music from the reception. The harbor stretched out before us, dotted with the lights of boats returning from evening sails. "I lost everything," Brittany whispered finally. "My fiancé, my friends, my reputation. Everyone in Charleston thinks I'm the woman who couldn't keep her man." "You lost someone who wasn't right for you," I said gently. "And you still have your family, even if you haven't always treated us well." She turned to look at me, her eyes filled with a pain I had never seen before. "You don't understand, Emma. Everything came easily to you. School, work, now this. I had to fight for everything, and it still wasn't enough." "Easy?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Brittany, you spent years making me feel small. Every achievement I had, you found a way to diminish. Every dress I wore, every date I went on, every job I got, you had something critical to say. Nothing about my life has been easy, especially not living in your shadow." She was quiet for a long moment, processing my words. "I was jealous," she admitted finally. "You always seemed so sure of yourself, so comfortable in your own skin. I felt like I had to be perfect all the time, and it was exhausting." The music from the reception had shifted to something slower, more romantic, and I knew Michael was probably looking for me. But this conversation felt important. Like something we should have had years ago. "Michael and I didn't plan for this to happen," I said. "We were just two people who found comfort in each other during a difficult time. It grew into something real." "I know," Brittany said softly. "I could see it in the way he looked at you, even before I wanted to admit it. He never looked at me that way." A tear rolled down her cheek, and for the first time in years, I felt genuine sympathy for my sister. She had built her entire identity around being the perfect daughter, the perfect fiancée, the perfect society woman. Losing Michael had meant losing herself. "What will you do now?" I asked. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing her mascara further. "I don't know. Maybe it's time I figured out who I am without all the expectations." She paused, looking out at the water. "I owe you an apology, Emma, for the engagement party, for all the years of making you feel less than. You deserved better from me." The apology hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't forgiveness. That would take time. But it was a beginning. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." We sat together for a few more minutes, two sisters who had spent years as strangers, finally seeing each other clearly. When I stood to return to my wedding reception, Brittany caught my hand. "Be happy, Emma," she said. "You deserve it." I squeezed her fingers once before walking back toward the lights and laughter of my new life. As I returned to the reception, Michael immediately appeared at my side, his eyes searching my face with concern. "How is she?" he asked quietly, his hand finding mine. "She'll be okay," I said, meaning it. "We both will be." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of dancing, laughter, and celebration. Our guests gradually began to leave, offering final congratulations and well wishes. My parents were among the last to go, my mother embracing me tightly as she whispered how proud she was of the woman I had become. "Your honeymoon in Napa Valley will be perfect," she said, straightening my veil one last time. "You've waited long enough for your happiness." As Michael and I prepared to leave for our hotel suite, I caught a glimpse of Brittany saying goodbye to our aunt and uncle. She stood straighter now, her composure restored, and when our eyes met across the room, she nodded slightly. It wasn't friendship. That would take time to rebuild. But it was acknowledgement. 3 months later, I stood in the kitchen of our new home in the historic French Quarter of Charleston. Morning sunlight streaming through the windows as I prepared coffee for Michael and myself. The house was a restored 18th century townhouse with original hardwood floors and exposed brick walls. Nothing like the modern mansion Brittany had picked out for her future with Michael. "Any regrets?" Michael asked, appearing behind me and wrapping his arms around my waist. It was a question he had asked several times since our wedding, and I knew he worried about the cost of our happiness. "None," I said, leaning back against his chest. "Even with everything we've been through." The aftermath of our wedding had been challenging. Some members of Charleston society had ostracized us, viewing our relationship as a betrayal of social protocols. Others had rallied around us, particularly those who had witnessed Brittany's years of condescending behavior. Michael had lost a few business contacts, but he had gained others who respected his integrity. Brittany had surprised everyone by accepting a job offer in Atlanta, announcing her departure from Charleston just 6 weeks after our wedding. The distance had been good for all of us, giving her space to rebuild her life and our family time to heal. She had called me on my birthday last month, our first real conversation since the wedding, and though we were far from the sisters we might have been, we were learning to be civil. "I have some news," Michael said, turning me in his arms. "The Patterson account came through. We're going to be able to expand the firm." I smiled and kissed him, tasting the success and satisfaction on his lips. Michael's architecture firm had struggled after our wedding, as some clients questioned his character, but his talent and dedication had ultimately won out. The Patterson account was the largest residential development project in Charleston's history. 6 months later, I received a call that changed everything. Brittany was getting married to a man she had met in Atlanta, a doctor who worked with underprivileged children. She was calling to invite us to the wedding. "I know it's a lot to ask," she said over the phone, "if you're willing." Michael watched my face as I processed the request. After a long moment, I nodded. I'll be there, I said. Standing beside Brittany at her wedding in a small church outside Atlanta, I watched her marry someone who clearly adored her for who she was becoming, not who she had been. Her husband, Dr. James Mitchell, looked at her with genuine love and respect, the kind of love that builds people up rather than tearing them down. Thank you, Brittany whispered as we posed for photos after the ceremony, for giving me the chance to be better. Thank you, I replied, for finally letting me be myself. 2 years after our own wedding, Michael and I welcomed our daughter, Charlotte, into the world. As I held her in my arms for the first time, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. It hadn't been easy, and we had hurt people along the way, but we had found something real and lasting. Brittany visited us when Charlotte was 3 months old, bringing her own 6-month-old son, David. We sat on the porch of our Charleston home, watching our children sleep in their carriers, and I marveled at how different our lives had become. Do you think we'll ever be close? Brittany asked, her voice quiet in the evening air. Maybe, I said, honestly, but we're closer now than we ever were before. The truth was, our relationship would always be complicated by our history, but we were learning to build something new on the foundation of mutual respect and understanding. We were different people now, mothers, wives, women who had learned that happiness couldn't be stolen or given away, only found within ourselves. As the sun set over Charleston Harbor, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt a deep sense of peace. The girl who had once cowered under her sister's criticism was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth. The society that had once judged us so harshly had eventually moved on to newer scandals, and we had built a life that was authentically ours. Michael appeared in the doorway, home from work, and his face lit up when he saw his daughter sleeping peacefully. He kissed my forehead and settled into the chair beside me, and I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the most painful endings. Sometimes finding your place in the world means stepping out of someone else's shadow. And sometimes the sister who once seemed like your greatest enemy becomes the person who teaches you the most about forgiveness and grace. In the end, we had all found our way home, to ourselves, to love, and to the understanding that happiness isn't a competition. It's a choice we make every day, one moment of courage at a time.